Hello there and welcome. So today I thought I'd be potentially controversial. I'm going to talk about road safety and particularly speed limits. Please don't switch off at this point, bear with me, because what I'm going to say here is just my opinion again, but I think it might be interesting whether you are a car driver or a motorcyclist, in fact any motorised road user, because if you didn't know, there's currently quite a lot of research and planning underway and looking quite closely at road safety. And one thing that's being adopted in Kent and certainly by other authorities is a thing which is called Vision Zero. So in other words, the object is by 2050 they want to aim to reduce all fatal road collisions to as near to zero as they can achieve. And quite rightly so. Why wouldn't you want that? You know, there are far too many deaths and injuries on roads as it is. But it's the way we go about achieving that, isn't it? And I've noticed some trends recently in my county around here that I'm a little bit questioning of. So when we look at history of roads in Britain, it's quite interesting, and there's loads of things we can read about and research. We find that the highest recorded amount of road deaths on UK roads was in 1966. Unfortunately, it's dropped year on year since then, generally speaking, as a general trend. I mean, you know, some years you get a little bit of a peak and some years it drops down, but the general overall pattern is that road deaths have dropped since then, and great. But it seems that with the exception of last year due to lockdown, that since 2010 casualty reduction in the UK has plateaued. It's not significantly changed, and every year and every month I very often get certain things dropping into my inbox or social media that I can read about the roads in the UK. One thing that is very significant is that we generally talk mainly about speed, and speed has been the focus for years and years, and I've got some opinions and thoughts about that. So in the 1980s, when I started driving, and when in the 1990s, A roads predominantly were national speed limit. You certainly had some reductions, 40 limits where appropriate, but generally speaking they were national speed limits, as were B-class roads, unclassified roads, rural roads. And of course at strategic places you may well see the occasional 40 limit and maybe even the occasional 50. 30 limits for urbans. You didn't see 20s back then. It's a relatively new introduction. So this sign here is a sign that you're not going to see very often in Kent, and in fact we don't. National speed limit applies. Because now the vast majority of A roads that I can think of in East Kent, that when I was learning to drive, and certainly for probably 20 plus years of my motoring life, were all national speed limits, have now reduced to 50s, 40s and 30s. And whilst I get that traffic now is busier than it's ever been and there are probably more vehicles on the road than there have ever been, we have made massive inroads on vehicular safety. So when we look at the construction of vehicles, we have better tyres, airbags, crumple zones, anti-lock braking systems, traction control systems, automatic braking systems, you name it. These days pretty much we have it. Things changed massively in the 80s and then the 90s when the front and the rear seatbelt laws were brought in, of course. And so in-car safety has changed massively. Now I know massive changes haven't been made with motorcycles, but there are airbag jackets, tyres have improved, braking systems have improved. You know, we really are looking at completely different situations than we were with the vehicles back in the 90s, the 80s the 70s and the 60s. We've come on in leaps and bounds. Vehicles are capable of accelerating much more quickly, as we know, and they're also capable of stopping much more quickly than they used to back in the day. But despite all this technology and improvements in vehicular safety, we still seem to be facing problems, even though the crash statistics show that we have had this big reduction year on year, generally speaking, since 1966. So whenever we hear about road safety, the first thing that I always hear is the speed kills message. We know, don't we, that the faster we go, if things go wrong, impact speeds do more damage to vehicles and do more damage to bodies. It's a fact of physics, you can't alter that. But as with everything in life, there is risk, and risk needs to be minimised. So when I look at these Kent roads over the years that have had speed reductions, I can quote many roads: A290, A291, A256, A257, A258, A28 that I'm on now, the A252 which we're heading towards, the A251. You name an A road in Kent, you're going to be hard pushed now to find a national speed limit on it. Why do we think that constantly reducing these speed limits is making a significant difference to road safety? Because I don't believe that it does. I think what it creates a lot of the time is a problem where cautious and sensible drivers will spend far too much time looking at their speedometers, because the speed limits are up and down. It's like now, we just come out of a 40 into a 50, now we're back into a 40 again. If you start spending lots of time thinking about your speedometer and the speedo, and of course we've got to be able to drive within speed limits, it's a skill, it's part of the art of driving, of course. But one of the issues with getting overly paranoid about these constant changes and information overload possibly is we're not going to be scanning and observing in the way that we're supposed to. Don't forget, not everyone is a born natural driver or road user. We have lots of different people on the road with lots of different abilities, even though they're operating vehicles. So professionals have said in the past that speed is not the answer to solving our road collision problems, but more ability and particularly observational skills. And the one thing that we could do to seriously reduce collisions on UK roads is to lift people's eyes up, get them to look further up the road and anticipate and plan more. The problem I see that is local authorities very often are under pressure to achieve and to reduce these casualties, but there's nothing in place to improve driver training. So the only measurable way of doing it is by speed, because by measuring speed you have an instant result, you can have instant fines, you can bring in revenue, and you can quote lots of statistics and numbers of people caught breaking the law. So let's just look at this road here, the junction, the A28, the A252. Quite a lot of collisions at that junction over the years, still happening even though they've dropped the speed limit. So this, in my day, back in the 90s, this was all national speed limit. It's now 40. And when they first made some improvements on this road recently, I thought, what a good idea. There were some new road signs put in, and I thought, sensible. I came back about a week later, and they'd absolutely changed all the speed limits. So this was national speed limit. It then went to 50. It's now gone to 40, and some of those 40s have become 30s. When we look at a road such as this, we've got to really start asking questions as to why we have to bring traffic down to 40 miles an hour. Why is it that drivers cannot do what they're supposed to be doing? So 50, this was national, it's now 50. Look at the width of the road. So some people say, look, our poor collision record at Bender Head. Let's look at this bend, shall we? Slow, reduce speed now, chevrons, great, I like the chevrons, I'm happy with the solid whites. Why is this bend so very difficult to negotiate, I wonder, for someone who's trained to drive or ride properly? Reduce speed now, bend. Nice wide road. Visibility is just starting to open up. No problem with a solid white line here. Chevrons, yeah, they're useful. Poor collision record at bend ahead. It's often been said that too much information can cause overload in the brain and can distract from certain other assessments. So if we start putting up too much signage, we run the risk that we're going to get problems in other ways. Hence why if you keep glancing at the speedo and reading every single road sign, could be an issue. Why is it that for maybe most of us who actually can drive, why is it dangerous to ride or drive at 60 mile an hour on a road such as this, but it's okay at 50? Let's look at the next little section. Right, reduce speed now. 2 arrows telling us solid white line systems coming up. Chevron, solid white line, slightly adverse camber, that's the road surface, it was a little bit rough there. I'm at 50. I don't find that bend particularly challenging. I may do at night in all fairness, but if we've got good cat's eyes, we should be driving maybe slightly slower at night anyway, shouldn't we? Okay, now this is now dropped to 30. You know, why? There's a roundabout. This was national speed limit. It was 40, now it's 30. And I'm not going to go further up the A252, I'm going to turn onto the 251, which many years ago, yet again, was indeed national speed limit. But of course this one now, as is that one, is all 40s and 50s, and so it goes on, and I won't bore you with it anymore. But this is East Kent A-class roads for you. So it's not just national speed limits that have been eroded in this county, and in many others no doubt, but it's also the 30 limits that are now spreading massively down to 20 mile an hour limits. I've got nothing against 20 mile an hour limits in principle where they are appropriate and they serve a purpose. But what I'm tending to notice in towns around here now is that they've started off in the busier town centres where 20 is quite reasonable and acceptable, and also in some residential areas, but they're now starting to spread further. It's like the councils have had a little go and then they've spread the extent. It begs the question, where is this all going to end, this constant reduction in speed limits? A lot of people are seeing these speed limits as unreasonable now, and for a lot of drivers that will mean that they disregard them because they see them as ridiculous. You lose the effectiveness if you overdo something inappropriately. So not so long ago, all of these roads that I'm riding on now were 30 mile an hour speed limits. Now they've all been reduced to 20s. And as I say, on a lot of these roads, can't see the point in it. Now in this sort of zone, yeah, absolutely. 20 is plenty, as they say. Absolutely right it is. Not got an issue. Because to comply with speed limits such that are so low in zones where it doesn't really feel like it should be, a lot of other road users are going to get impatient, and I've experienced it on several occasions where I've had a car right up my rear end because I'm complying with the speed limit. And you know, I agree with them in a way. I don't agree with them riding up my rear end, but I agree it's frustrating being trapped at 20 miles an hour when it's actually not necessary. So all around here is 20. I don't think that Audi's driving at 20. So whilst doing a little bit of research about speed limits in the UK, I found it quite interesting. And okay, the speed limits were about 20 mile an hour back then, but in 1931 all speed limits were abolished, and the reason for it was they were so universally disregarded that the powers that be sought to have them abolished because they brought the law into contempt. And what concerns me with this constant reducing of speed limits these days, as one of the sole or primary road safety measures, is that people may well indeed start to completely disregard speed limits. Now, of course, rather unlike 1931, these days, of course, we can set up lots of cameras and we can punish everyone and we can fine them. And we can put points on their licence. And, of course, insurance companies rub their hands when you do that because you've now become a riskier driver and they can put your premium up. So this is why many people probably think it's always fleece the motorist for money. Speed limits should be there primarily for safety. I appreciate they may also have a slight impact on the environment as well, but primarily safety should be the reason, and they should be there so that all road users can look at a speed limit and think, this is fair, this makes sense, I can accept this. And that way you've got a much better chance of compliance. From my perspective, I just see this constant speed limit business as very, very counterproductive, and I know that so many people I talk to do not respect the fact that speed limits are being constantly reduced. So I was looking at some crash statistics the other day and a report that was issued and put out in the media, and they were referring to crash statistics in 2016. And interestingly, it said that about a quarter of all fatal collisions involved excess speed. That was one of the little buzz lines, if you like. And then I looked at the pie chart that they'd done, and it was clearly less than a quarter. So what we've done is we've used statistics and put a nice little spin on it to try and invoke that it's all about speed routine again. And then in smaller print it went on to say that other fatal collisions were a result of drink driving, drug driving, misjudging approach, speed and position of oncoming vehicles, fatigue, reckless and careless driving. It's funny how that they contributed to 76+% of fatal accidents, but that's not what the headline is. I get really disappointed when we're constantly being told that we need to improve road safety, which we do, but we keep banging the same drum and not addressing the true issues. While speed contributes to some collisions result from many factors coming together at the same time. They are not just happening because of one thing. An inappropriate speed absolutely is a big problem. But when you look at the training of personnel such as the emergency services, who are trained to drive at much higher speeds on public roads and have much higher safety records, despite the amount of high miles that they travel at higher speeds and under pressurised circumstances, their collision record is really good, i.e. it's low. So doesn't that make a suggestion that speed in the right hands with the right knowledge and ability is okay? And I certainly know that one of the things that I was taught when I was first learning to drive back in the early 80s or mid 80s was that you reacted to hazards and you slowed down. And having trained many people to ride motorcycles over the last 10 plus years who already possess car licenses and in some cases have been drivers for many years, I can tell you that the level of their knowledge and ability on public roads is not where it should be. So why are we not spending more time and money investing in training people to drive properly? Why is it we've still failed to set the bar at a sensible height for new drivers? Now, motorcyclists for some time have had to have graduated licenses. Why is it that a 17 or 18 year old who wants to ride motorcycles will have to pass their test 3 times to get a full unrestricted motorcycle licence, whereas a car driver who is 17 or 18 does a test once and has a licence for life? And recently, when graduated licences for car drivers were put before the government, they rejected it and didn't proceed with it any further. And the driving test standard, sadly, is a fairly low bar. A bar which most people fall well below once they let out to do their own thing and get on with it. And yet we're not addressing it. But apparently, we're serious about road safety. Well, I don't think we are serious about road safety. And I think it's all too much trouble to try and sort out the root cause of the problem. Roads are not dangerous and cars are not dangerous. We've seen this in the media a lot over the years, haven't we? Dangerous roads. A road's not dangerous unless the road surface is shocking or it's falling off a cliff. A car isn't dangerous. It's the person operating. It's the same in motorcycles. Cool, motorcycles, dangerous old machines. I've heard that so many times over the years. No, they're not. They're dangerous if they're in the wrong hands, and they're potentially dangerous to your personal safety if you cannot defend yourself against someone else who's being dangerous in another vehicle. But they're not dangerous in their own right, are they? So I watched a video recently. It was a few years ago, this incident. They were clamping down on drivers jumping the red flashing lights at level crossings, quite rightly so. The safety implications are horrendous. So the police officer stops the car and he says to the driver, so that's an endorsable offence, you get 3 points on your licence and a fine. But if you don't want that, you can go on a driver awareness course and be educated. And this car driver went, I'll take the points. I don't want to spend the time and money going on this course, I've got nothing to learn. For me, that's when you should take someone's driving licence away and they should be told they're going on the course or they don't get the licence back. And they're the sort of drivers that unfortunately are causing problems on our roads. And it's these drivers that are being involved in collisions that are meaning that all the speed limits are dropping as local authorities struggle to try and reduce crash statistics in a very simplistic way. And I'm not wanting to be self-righteous or anything here or disrespectful to anybody. We're human, we all make mistakes. And if you look at this motorway now, you'll see the vehicles are all packed together. Look at those vans, how close they are to the vehicles in front. You know, they're doing 60, 70 miles an hour. If something goes wrong, there's very little chance of reaction. In my day, there were more traffic police around than there are today. When I first joined the police, Kent had 5 traffic garages. When I joined traffic, we had 3. We ended up with 1, and that's all we've got now. We were actually able to patrol back in the day. We were able to sit up, watch the traffic, stop motorists, advise, and where necessary, prosecute. Where's that happening these days in any large degree? Where's the good old professional traffic copper gone? I really do believe that we should have a system that where people are involved in collisions and where people are caught to be driving in inappropriate ways, that for most cases they should go on driver improvement courses, and they shouldn't just be classroom based courses, they should be practical driving courses, they should be like advanced driving courses, and we should be educating and upskilling people. There's many of us trainers out there who train cars, motorcycles, HGVs, whatever, who I'm sure would be more than glad to be involved in some system of helping drivers to learn to drive better. And I know people haven't always got the money or the time or the inclination to become advanced or enhanced or better drivers. Why aren't local authorities prepared to channel more money into subsidising schemes where qualified instructors can enhance people's driving ability or deal with people who have been caught driving badly, put them on a decent driving course and get some standards up and try and change people's attitudes? One fatal collision apparently costs over £2 million to deal with. Think how many drivers you could train and help with £2 million. So one of the comments I read when reading some of this Vision Zero consultation paperwork was, everybody has the right to go out on a journey and come home again. and absolutely agree. They absolutely do. But one thing I do notice as well that's become more and more apparent probably in the last 20 years is that we are good at talking about rights, but we're not very good about talking about responsibilities. When I look back growing up over the years, I never really had any conception of what was my right to do anything. But I was certainly very aware that I had responsibilities to behave in a certain way and do certain things and not to create problems for other people. It seems to me that that balance has shifted massively the other way in society in general. And of course what you get in society in general will always be reflected on the road, because society are road users. You can't odds that. And so some of the rudeness you get, some of the arrogance, some of the I don't give a damn about you attitude, you know, complete discourtesy, it manifests itself out on the roads. Defensive riding or driving tactics are so important. You know, you might be able to drive really, really well, just like you did on your test, and you may preserve that test standard. But if you don't anticipate and recognise other hazards on the road, like him there in the BMW holding his phone texting, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to defend yourself from other vehicles. And we can see that's why he's all over the road, because he's not only is he speeding, he's using his mobile phone and he's not in proper control of the vehicle. And there he goes again over the white line. And of course defensive riding and being aware of other road users' behaviour is so important. So I was checking my mirrors, I saw the BMW coming down quite fast. It just didn't feel right to me. Now I appreciate that's many years of experience, but it's wise for you to get a feel for other road users, because you very often can. It's that self-preservation kicks in. And so if that BMW had resulted in a collision, whilst he was exceeding the speed limit by probably about 10 miles an hour, maybe not even that in certain circumstances, speed wouldn't be the contributing factor, would it? It's the fact he's using a mobile phone and not paying attention. He would have had an accident potentially at 20 miles an hour. So of course we need speed limits. But we need speed limits to be reasonable, justified and proportionate if we want the general public to take any notice of them and to respect them. And where we see this constant spreading of nationals being reduced to 50s and 30s being reduced to 20s, many drivers will gradually lose sympathy and respect for the road safety message. For so long now, road safety has predominantly been all about kill your speed. And I, as much as anybody out there, always get very concerned with the way that some people do use excess speed in the wrong place. But I think that's the key to this. Inappropriate speed kills, but speed in its own right, if used in the correct place, isn't a problem. And speed is a byproduct of travel. You cannot change that fact at all. So if we are going to talk about road safety in a very serious way, we must look at doing something other than just keep reducing speed limits. And when that approach to reducing speed limits still reveals that actually casualty reduction has not significantly increased, in the way that it hasn't significantly increased in the last 10 or so years, despite the constant reduction of speed limits, what are local authorities going to do then? Are they then going to make everyone drive at 10 miles an hour in towns and 40 miles an hour out on every other road? In the short journey that I've just done today and making this video, I've seen 3 what I regard as significant road safety issues. We've got people travelling on a motorway at legal or maybe slightly in excess of legal speeds, but the big safety issue there is their proximity, their following distances. That was a recipe for potential disaster. The next incident was a guy travelling yet again on a national speed limit, 70 mile an hour road, slightly in excess of the speed limit, but using a handheld mobile phone. And the other one, of course, was the white Audi, which was driving in the 20 mile an hour speed limit, and maybe it wasn't actually in excess of 20, but the manner of driving and the speed that was used for the particular manoeuvre, for me, was probably a potential safety issue. And reducing speed limits isn't going to stop a lot of these problems. So if we are serious about really reducing casualties on our roads, we have to do much more to improve driver training, driver attitude and driver ability. Reducing speed limits will not achieve what we ultimately want. Be interested in your thoughts. So until next time, ride safe, take care.